when I was growing up. In high school, I had a really great group of guy friends. And at the time, I was actually probably much more close to my guy friends than I was to my girlfriends. And in part, I think it's because I'm a big sports fan. I grew up in Boston, so I'm a huge Red Sox fan. I'm a huge Patriots fan. I love to play fantasy football. And so I wasn't, again, as a middle schooler, as a high school, I was never really into the super girly things, which now, I've definitely embraced those things, but that came to me pretty late in life. And so, as I mentioned, we had a family business growing up that my grandfather had started, and I never really spent time thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up, because I just thought I was going to be the CEO of that business. And it never occurred to me that was like a gender specific job. Just you could be the CEO and run the business. And I think that informed a lot of where I am today, because my default assumption was that I was supposed to go get an MBA, because that's what people who are in business do. Although I'll admit, secretly, I really, truly wanted to be the shortstop for the Boston Red Sox. And I actually wrote my business school essay about how that had, if things didn't work out at Harvard, that's what I was going to go try to do.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is your community? Today, we're talking with Erica Blob, the COO and partner at Brighton Park Capital. Erica went to Duke for her BA and then Harvard Business School for her MBA. And she spent most of her career in the male-dominated finance industry. She worked for Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, SAC, New Mountain Capital, and of course, now Brighton Park Capital. In Boss Mamas, we talk about the importance of calling your community and having a community who's there that you can lean on. Erica's a really good example of this. She shares how she loves spending time with her friends and how she opens up time to do this by specific strategies of outsourcing other tasks, including getting some weekend help with the kids. And because of her investment in her community, Erica also shares how this has paid off for her, not just filling her bucket and her tank and her fuel for her hard job, but also by giving her strategies and courage. For example, talking about hard stuff like salaries, sharing salary information, and then having a conversation so that she can get more equitable pay. I'm really excited for you to meet this boss mama. All right, Erica, I have to kick off our conversation with your Instagram name. So tell us what this name is and what is it all about?
So my Instagram handle is Yes, I Said Blob, B-L-O-B. So yes, I said blob. And the story behind it is that when I was growing up, my maiden name is Caney. And it's spelled Keany. And so I was constantly correcting people who thought it was Kearney, Carney, Keeney, and got so frustrated that I just was looking forward to the day that I met, my future husband and could change my name and be Erica Smith or something like that. And I think it's a real lesson in life that you should be very careful what you wish for, because my husband's last name is Blob. And about a week after, I never really thought about it. And actually, it's very funny because we were friends before we started dating. And so I used to call him Blob, not John. But about a week after I got engaged, I went to the Milken Conference in LA. And I was at, a dinner and met somebody who thought that my fiance's last name was one of the funniest things he had ever heard. And then he pointed out, though, that it was very memorable. And I hadn't spent much time thinking about, was I going to tape Blob? Was I going to keep Caney? But he just kept insisting that this last name was great. And so about a month later, I was at another conference for work, and I was in one of those giant, cocktail party ballroom situations. And across the room, I hear someone shout, "Hey, Erica Blob." And it was the guy that I had met a few weeks before. And so at that moment, a light bulb really went off in my head that, not only was I definitely going to take my husband's last name, that I was going to really embrace it and own it and incorporated it into my life. And so my Instagram handle is a reflection of that and a reference to every time I tell anyone at a shop or a restaurant what my last name is. So I say, make a reservation for 4 under Blob. The reaction on the other line is always, I'm sorry. And then you have to say, yes, I said Blob. And people really don't want to believe it. But again, you got to own it. But there's a couple of great things about having the last name Blob. One, you really have to focus on your physical fitness, because you really do not want to become a big fat blob. And two, whenever I hear somebody who has that last name, which almost never happens, but when I do hear someone has that last name, I know that they somehow must be related to my husband's family. So here in the town that I live in, I actually met this great woman and have become friendly with her because I was in a store one day and I was giving my last name for their customer file. And they asked me to specify which blob, and I was in shock. And I quickly found out there was another blob in our town, and insisted on meeting her for coffee. And she's an incredibly impressive, accomplished woman. So there are some benefits to being a blob.
It feels like a show. I feel like I would watch a show called The Blobs, and all these characters.
Meet the blobs.
Meet the blobs. Yes, yes. So that's pretty fun story. And it's interesting because your identity of having name, because name is, there's something behind a name.
Absolutely.
How does that impact, this career that you've had, in thinking of the path that you took? And did you feel like this dream that you had of wanting to meet someone and have a Smith, did you also have a dream of wanting to be in this career path, really dominated by males?
It's actually interesting, speaking of names. So my maiden name, my middle name is my mother's maiden name, Simmons. And that is also the name of the company that my grandfather founded. And so that, of all the names sort of in my life, that's actually the one that sort of has the most significance. We're very close to my grandfather growing up. He started this company. And when I was a child, my assumption was that someday I was going to grow up and become the CEO of the company. And so it's ironic now that actually that middle name isn't really much of a part of my life anymore, and I don't run the company. But I think that mindset also really came from my mom. Was a CPA in the 70s, and she had her MBA from Babson. And that had a really big influence on me. And one of the stories that she used to tell me growing up was about how when she was an undergraduate, she and a couple of her female friends who were studying accounting decided to start the Women's Business Network at their college. And there was a men's business network, but there was not a women's business network. And they decided to start the group, and they couldn't find a space to hold the meetings. And so my mom and her colleagues got very creative and decided to have a launch party for the new women's business network at school. And so they decided to invite the chancellor of the university to their new space. And he showed up. He said, absolutely, I'm going to come support the Women's Business Network. And, they bought cookies and punch and things like that. And they decorated the outside of the door to the room where the event was going to be held. It said Women's Business Network. And the chancellor showed up, and they welcomed him, and they opened the door, and he walked in, and he was inside the men's bathroom. And so they said, look, we asked for space for this, and you didn't give us some. So we got creative, and we decided to create our own space. And needless to say, the Women's Business Network very quickly got their own space on campus. So, that's the kind of influence I had in my life from my mom. So she was a CPA. She worked at Arthur Andersen. When I was a kid, I always was raised with the mindset that just because something was for boys didn't mean that I should have it. My mom actually coached my T-ball team growing up, which was, I think, 8 boys and 3 girls. And the 3 girls were my mom's 2 best friends, daughters, and I. I had a red and black BMX dirt bike when I was 6 or 7. I played with GI Joes. I always was drawn to sort of the boys' toys, and didn't really think much about it. I loved sports when I was growing up. In high school, I had a really great group of guy friends. And at the time, I was actually probably much more close to my guy friends than I was to my girlfriends. And in part, I think it's because I'm a big sports fan. I grew up in Boston, so I'm a huge Red Sox fan. I'm a huge Patriots fan. I love to play fantasy football. And so I wasn't, again, as a middle schooler, as a high school, I was never really into the super girly things, which now, I've definitely embraced those things, but that came to me pretty late in life. And so, as I mentioned, we had a family business growing up that my grandfather had started, and I never really spent time thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up, because I just thought I was going to be the CEO of that business. And it never occurred to me that was like a gender specific job. Just you could be the CEO and run the business. And I think that informed a lot of where I am today, because my default assumption was that I was supposed to go get an MBA, because that's what people who are in business do. Although I'll admit, secretly, I really, truly wanted to be the shortstop for the Boston Red Sox. And I actually wrote my business school essay about how that had, if things didn't work out at Harvard, that's what I was going to go try to do.
That's awesome. I love that story about your mom, because gosh, talk about gutsy to have the cookies and punch. And just, if we had a phone back then, would have videotaped that and gone viral with like the urinals.
I know. I can only imagine today what that, there'd be TikToks and things like that. Yeah, she also drove a motorcycle as well.
Wow.
So great influence on me. And she was, incredibly supportive of me throughout my life. My entire career, I was a competitive horseback rider growing up. And, she traveled all over the country and all over the world with me to support that. And so never, again, my entire life, I always thought that I could do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't, there was never any doubt that if I put my mind to something, I could do it. So I'm really grateful to my mom for giving me that.
Thanks, moms. So let's fast forward. Now I'm picturing you with your BMX bike and my Joe's and your sports, wanting to play shortstop for the Red Sox. And so you're in this industry that is very much dominated by males, and not just people, but it comes with a culture. So I'm curious, because you've absolutely grown in your career and in the senior position, can you reflect for us? What did it look like when you first arrived? And then what does it look like as a female now for you?
Yep. So I work in the private equity industry. And so in the early days of my career, as many people who work in private equity do, I started out working in an investment bank. And, in talking to a number of other women, in my network today, and we all started working at banks or in consulting roles, it's really interesting, because when we were 20, 21, 22, we had a vague idea that what we were doing is we were entering a male dominated environment. I mean, as an econ major at Duke, I was in the minority, but it wasn't, I wasn't one of 1 or 2 people. There were certainly a number of women, but it was far fewer than the men. And so it just, we just said, okay, great. I'm going to go work in an investment bank. That's fine. And, in the first 2 years in the analyst program, I really did not notice anything related to gender and equity. I worked with really incredible, powerful female MDs who, to this day are great influences on my life. But it became much more apparent to me and to all of us, to all my friends who I've talked to about this, But the more senior we got, the more we could, when we went from associates to VPs and from VPs to principals or directors, that's where we really started to encounter the gender inequity, or just, the big differences became much more apparent. And I think one of the big sort of challenges in working in a male-dominated environment is making sure you can find your authentic voice. And I think you have to do a lot of sort of experimenting about what feels right for you. So, the way that you present your arguments or even have conversations in the hallway with your male employees really does make a big difference in how you're perceived and treated. And I think in the beginning, I tended to be very quiet and assumed that people would be able to just know what the quality of my work was I was doing. And I think some of that mentality became because it always worked for me in the past. I had taken tests and scored really highly on tests in college. I, was among the top of my class, and that was all based on, written tests and papers. But in the workplace, it's very different, right? People don't know what you're working on unless you talk to them about it. And so you really need to speak up to be seen. So I really struggled with that for a while. And I think one of the big differences is that, or at least for me personally, is that you have to push yourself to speak when you don't have what I say, like 110% of all the facts. And I think a lot of women, and me in particular, find that like you want to make sure you are certain about what you're talking about before you open your mouth. In business school, I wouldn't speak unless I was certain I knew what the answer was. And then what would happen is I'd wait too long because in my head, I was going back and forth about what, was I right? Was I wrong? Had I not considered something? And then someone would raise their hand and answer the question. And it was exactly what I was thinking in my head. And I had just completely missed my opportunity. And I found that was an incredibly frustrating experience. And so that really shaped me because I think that if I had just been a little bit more confident, I would have been able to really get a lot more out of the experience. I mean, I got an incredible thing out of the experience, but I think, it really taught me that it's okay to take risks. It's okay to be wrong. And so today I take a lot more risks in, offering opinions or, my gut instinct on something. And they're, I try to be fact-based, but, while I'm wrong often, I think I contribute a lot more because I speak up. And many times it's because I have a different perspective or a different view because of my gender, but because of my life experience or because of the area of the firm that I represent. And so I think the best decisions get made when people with different backgrounds and different perspectives contribute to the dialogue. And you can only have that type of conversation if you're willing to speak up.
Oh my gosh, Erica, I have had the same experience. So I'm so glad you're sharing yours. And I actually didn't even know that it was common to doubt yourself. And this idea of creating the perfect response and making sure that it was airtight and practicing it. I would practice mine in my head to say, okay, how would I respond? Okay, here's what my points would be. And by the time I could put it all together and check, it was like several comments in and I'd miss the moment.
Yeah. And and the moment becomes too fraught too.
Yes.
I mean, it's definitely an example of the whole, the saying perfect is the enemy of good, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's fascinating too, because I had to tell myself to get over this strategy. I'd love to hear yours, but my strategy was to say right out of the gate, say it, like be the first to talk, because then, I mean, you can do all the easy layups because, it's the beginning of the conversation to make sure I talked. And I would tell myself, you're not walking out of this class until you've got 3 3 comments in, and there's a lot of type A people who are jockeying for that position. So I would immediately, who's the main character? I'm like, I know the main character. Here you go. One's done. And
what's the name of the book? I got it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so what was your strategy to be able to start speaking up? Because it's easier to say that, and now you do it often, but what were you doing to get yourself on the court?
Yeah. And it's funny because the ironic thing is I have ended up, a huge part of my job is communicating with our investors. So I've actually gone sort of to the other extreme, and my job actually involves a lot of public speaking. So I've sort of, I guess you sort of take on the things that scare you, and I'm a lot more comfortable in it now. But, I think you have to sort of identify where you can have easy wins. So a little bit of what you were saying, which is, I'll say, okay, I absolutely know that this is true. And, I think sometimes people don't say things because they think they're very obvious, but then someone else will say them. So I try to say, okay, well, here's something, that's part of the discussion that I feel like is completely obvious. I know this is true. And if you can start off the bat with that, then you've already opened your mouth. And then it just becomes, and then someone says, oh yeah, that's, you're right about that, or good point. And then once you hear a good point, then you're like, all right, now I can sort of, try out some of these other points, which may not be good, but you can put it out there for sure.
Love it. Yeah. So let's talk some more and go deeper here, Erica, because while you started talking and feeling more comfortable speaking up and people now are paying attention, there's also real inequity as a woman. So can you share an example or a time when you experienced discrimination because of being female?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, on the one hand, I have had a great experience. I've had some incredible male mentors and colleagues. And so I would say by and large, I wouldn't be in this industry if I, didn't love the people that I work with and love their competitive drive and, deal making capabilities. But one of the things I learned when I was in my early 30s is that men share a lot more information about their compensation than women do. And sometimes that's because there aren't other women to share information with. But I remember having a conversation at a firm I used to work with. And it was like the day after bonus day or something like that. And I was chatting with a friend of mine who was a male colleague. And he like rattled off, what everyone else had gotten in their bonuses. And I was like shocked that conversation had occurred. And, I had a friend in my industry who works at a different company, who was a little bit older than I was. And she was looking for a new job, and she and I were chatting, and she was incredibly transparent with me about what she was currently being paid, what this new job was being offered, why she thought this was too low or that. And it made me realize that I was not being compensated as I should be. But I had no way of fixing that until I knew what the data was. And so I think, there's a lot of conversations around women, gender pay, gap disparity. And I think a lot of it does come from the fact that, men talk about it a lot more. And so if they find out someone else is getting paid something, they have the ability to walk into the office and demand to be paid, equally. And so I really, when I realized that in my early 30s, I really made a practice of encouraging, both younger women that I work with and myself and my friends to really be a lot more transparent. And that doesn't mean saying like, hey, this is my annual salary and this is that, but really just, thinking about contacts and scales and ranges and references to other companies. And so, today I have a really great sounding board of a few very close girlfriends that I went to Harvard Business School with. And we're very open about discussing, if someone is looking for a new role, what the pay package is. And And if, the other ones think that that's not right, then we will go in and help, give suggestions of what we think that she should negotiate for, and sort of then provide that sort of like, all right, you got this, like you should go in and ask for XYZ. And I think it's been really powerful. So again, as I talk to younger women in our industry, my industry, I encourage them to do the same thing.
What do you think holds women back from sharing and being so open about money?
I think for a period of time, it was probably not having enough people, like peers in the room to have a comparison to. And I also think some of it just sort of goes to like old fashioned, out of date concepts that, you sort of men are louder and more vocal and women are quiet and, should just sort of sit there and, be happy to be getting paid if it, and again, I don't think none of the organizations that I've worked at have felt that way, have really, treated women that way, but I think that could be deep rooted in that. But I think sometimes it's just a numbers game.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is society saying, Erica, I mean, you're greedy. If you're talking about Analiza, why are you asking for more? Aren't you just grateful that you have that job? And that's not a good woman or good leader to be so greedy and think about yourself. So I'm glad that we're talking about it, because the way to get to equity is to name it. And when we have information, then we can address it. But if we're not even willing to talk about it, it's really hard to get to equity.
Yeah, actually, that made me think of another story. When I was earlier in my career, I got hired to do a job, and at that point had found out some more data on compensation, and I used that data to negotiate my entry package at my firm, and it was materially different than what I had originally been offered. And really interestingly, the entire time that I worked for the organization, the person that I was negotiating with would bring up the fact that I had negotiated so hard, just in conversation in front of other people, and never really let me hear the end of it, which was, a very off-putting experience, considering that the data that I was presenting was like totally just market compensation. So
that is so real.
I think that's also why people are afraid to do it, right? Like you don't want to negotiate. I think some people don't want to negotiate because they're worried about, how they'll be viewed after the fact.
Yeah. At the same time, Erica, we know that I've been working in talent development for many, many, many years, and it's really gendered. Males will fight, negotiate, stick to their guns with getting their money, and then women will just take the first offer. It's like, wow, they never even negotiated past that one. So it's real.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to go deeper into community, because that's something in our conversations that has been really unique and powerful, just how you've developed mindfully a community, especially as a mom. How have you developed this community, knowing that back in the day you used to be more surrounded by males, and in your work you're surrounded by males? What has community meant to you? Have you made time for it as a mom? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's actually one thing that has really changed in my life. Today, overwhelmingly, my friends are all female. I have male friends, but sort of my deepest connections are with my female friends. And I think, I sort of have different groups of friends for different purposes and different needs that I have of sort of self-care in myself. I have, the group of girlfriends I have from business school who, we spend a lot of time talking about some of the issues we've been talking about today. And we grapple with similar issues about sort of work-life balance and raising children as working moms and those types of issues. And I've also built a fantastic community of women here in the town that I live in who really, support each other and lift each other up and, pick up each other's kids when they need to, or, are always great for a girls' night out or sort of stress relief. And, I really enjoy that because then I can sort of not think about sort of, my business life and really spend time with these girls. And, there's a lot of sort of community engagement with them and charitable work as well. So that's really fun. And then I have another group of people. I'm really, because as you probably can tell over the course of the conversation, I'm an incredibly competitive human being. I need an outlet for that. So I run a lot. I run marathons. And so I have another group of, people who like to do that and like to talk about that. So I think you build community by finding pockets of people who sort of, really sort of touch upon different facets of your life and provide you support or outlets for that. I just feel really lucky to have the people I do in my life. And then I still have my high school friends. I actually have a great text messaging chain with 3 of my high school friends that goes, touches everything from, the latest in pop culture to, how Mac Jones is doing on the Patriots. So, and we talk every single day. So.
It's so wonderful how much you care about community, know how much it fills your bucket and invest in your community. And I'm curious because you have a big job and you have a family, young kids. How do you make space for this community? What do you say to people who are like, it seems like you've got to sacrifice these other, like your family, to spend time with other people?
I think people who say that also probably get their energy from different sources or find relaxation in different sources. Like my husband very much, recharges and relaxes through he plays golf, but also he likes to sort of physically relax, watching TV or, sort of being by himself and being calm. I'm very much the opposite. Like for me, I get rejuvenated by being around people and laughing and, joking and doing silly things. So I think at times something can look like I have a very hectic schedule, but if you look at the pockets of it, like dinner with my girlfriends that I've squeezed in on a Thursday night between 7 and 9, and then have to go back to doing something for work, like that really is my time off. But that said, there's some other strategies I have too as well. One is, we have a lot of childcare. We have someone who lives in our house as an au pair, which, I would not be able to do half of what I do without that. We have someone who helps us on the weekend as well. That's sort of newer to our lives because my husband and I were finding that we were spending our entire weekends, cleaning up spilled milk, doing laundry, doing administrative tasks. And we weren't able to, really spend time engaged with our kids. And so, we said, look, this might be a temporary period of life where everything feels this crazy, but it's okay to ask for help and to have someone come in and sort of take some of that off of our shoulder. And so we've done that. And I'm a huge fan of exercise. I'm not a morning person, but I will get up at, very early hour to get my run in, and, just have to do that. And I'm a big believer in sort of self-care and massages, and things like that. But, I will not get a manicure. I get only getting pedicures. Those things take too much time and you can't do anything while you're doing them. So, but.
I think it's so interesting, Erica, that it's by knowing yourself, that you really get a high off spending time with people, that you value taking care of yourself, especially working out, and then that there are things that you like doing and like less doing. And so how do you create a life where you can max out those things that you enjoy in your element? And then if you can and have the financial resources, outsource out those other things. So I love that. And I love that you also mentioned that it doesn't look the same. Not everyone needs to have, I think you have like 3 groups or maybe 4 groups, kind of your high school friends, where you invest time, that it could look different, maybe less groups or no groups if you tend to be solitary, more like your husband who just likes to be alone. So I love that. I appreciate you sharing and knowing that people are in different places.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some, there are some negatives to sort of my version of relaxation, which is if I go sort of for too long of a period of time, sort of, burning the candle on both ends, as they say, like eventually I crash. Mm-hmm. And I'm prone to sort of getting sick for, 24-hour periods. And that's usually a good check-in that I need to slow down a little bit. But I wish I could do yoga. I've tried to meditate. I actually get a lot of the meditation, I think, when I'm running. But those are life goals of mine. My sister-in-law is a yogi, but I do not possess that ability at all.
Well, there's a zen in running. I mean, runner's high. It's a real thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I find your element. It could be knitting. Like I was talking to somebody, she's like, I love knitting. And I tried it and I can see why it's so meditative, because you're doing the same task and you're in flow. So to each our own, right? I love that you found yours, and there's no need to necessarily be a yogi.
Exactly. So yeah, I really love to take walks too. Like taking a walk is so wonderful. Just kind of slow down, look around you. So
yes. All right, let's do lightning round questions.
Sure.
Chocolate or vanilla?
So I'm gonna take a non-answer and say vanilla with chocolate chips. It's my favorite kind of ice cream. So you got to have a little of both. You can't have, it's kind of like my life. I need all sorts of things. I can't have one of anything.
Cooking or takeout?
It's not a takeout always.
Yeah, I was like, you're going to combine this too.
Yeah, nope. Always takeout. Oh, I tried those. I mean, I even tried those, the green chefs and I can't, just takeout.
Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
This is one of my life regrets. When I was in my early 20s, I really wanted to jump from a plane. I love roller coasters. So I love that sort of pit and the feeling in your stomach. And I bought my college roommate for her birthday a ticket so that both of us could go jump out of a plane. And it was a couple of days before September 11th. So we didn't end up doing it. And now that I have kids, it just isn't a decision I'm comfortable with. But I really regret not doing it.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
Only to walk the dog.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Mariah Carey?
I'm a -10. I am tone deaf completely, but I actually love singing and I love karaoke so much that I just don't care. I will do it, and everyone else around me is going to have to suffer.
What's a recent book that you've read?
I just finished reading It's Better to Be Feared by Seth Wickersham, which is a great book about the New England Patriots dynasty.
What's a favorite way to practice self-care?
This will not be surprising, but drinking margaritas with my girlfriends.
What's a good professional development that you've participated in?
I have done, I think a lot. The truly best things I've done have all been, really one-on-one coaching type sessions and mentorships. I think we met each other through YPO. I think that's been so far a really great sort of program for professional development. But I really love one-on-one coaching with qualified coaches. My sister's actually an executive coach. So I'm really lucky. I get a lot of free coaching.
What's your definition of a boss mama?
I think a boss mama is really just, someone out there who's making it work one day, one activity at a time. But she's someone who is supporting other women while she's doing that, never cutting them down. So a boss mama could be a CEO, or it could be a stay-at-home mom who is just, really just crushing it and taking great care of her children. But it's really about just, being in there and being supportive of the sisterhood.
What advice would you give your younger self?
This one's ask for help. I think if I look back at every mistake I've ever made, it's because I was too worried about asking for help.
Where can we find you? Like LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn, Erica Blob. I don't use Facebook anymore, but Instagram is definitely a guilty pleasure of mine. So yes, I said Blob is my Instagram handle. I've got one for my dog now as well. But yeah, yes, I said Blob is my my guilty pleasure. And if you like The Bachelor, I'm often commentating on that as well. Another guilty pleasure.
Okay, last question. Do you have a final ask, recommendations, or any parting thoughts for the audience?
I think it's just, every experience is another milestone on your journey. And if I look at how my career progressed, when I was 17, I never thought I would be doing the job that I'm doing today. And I think that, there are some times where I failed exceptionally, but I learned something from it, and it turned my career and moved my career in a different direction and allowed me to get to where I am today. So I think you just have to sort of look at every sort of victory, every mistake as part of a much bigger progression towards where you're ultimately supposed to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica. I really enjoyed the conversation.
So great speaking with you. Thanks, Analiza.